Everyone, and welcome to Let's Continue the Conversation, a panel discussion today for what we know will be an honest, positive, respectful, open minded, and productive dialogue about current events, inequality, and racism, and most importantly, how to work together to achieve a more harmonic community. I'd like to welcome our audience that's listening to us live on Business Radio X, and also welcome the viewers watching us live on YouTube. Our hope today is that today's discussion may open your mind to see things in a different light and perhaps even bring an understanding to some of the recent events that have rocked our nation during this tumultuous year. Our panel today focuses on area business leaders, and we are joined by the chairperson of the Gwinnett County Board of Commissioners, the president and CEO of the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce, a well-respected business executive with an iconic Atlanta-based business and leader in law enforcement. We will talk about their personal experiences, their fears, concerns, and importantly, ideas for racial empowerment. But before I introduce this esteemed panel, I'd like to bring Dan Miller, who is with us, the financial services firm Wealth Horizon. Dan, your company is sponsoring and underwriting this important series. Why did you feel this discussion was necessary to continue?
Well, Jocelyn, first of all, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to moderate this. My wife and business partner, Njeri Hewitt Miller, and I have lived in Atlanta for more than 40 years, and we truly love our city and our community. And like many other people, we've been disturbed by the recent incidents and events surrounding racial tensions. And we realize this can't just be something that we talk about when an incident occurs. We believe that this needs to be an ongoing conversation. And we searched for a way that we could perhaps make a difference. And we felt inspired to create this forum, promoting honest and respectful dialogue. And while we recognize that these conversations can be uncomfortable and difficult at times, it is our hope that this can begin a path to a deeper understanding.
Well, certainly, I hope it will. And I'm sure with our distinguished guests, we will have that happen. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Jess.
we will continue the conversation with our very distinguished guest. And I would say that I had a long biography prepared for each of one of them, and they told me do not say anything. So I will introduce our guests and their titles. First, we have Nicole Hendrickson joining us. Welcome. She is chairperson-elect of the Gwinnett County Board of Commissioners. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, and thank you.
And also, we have Njeri, Director of Public Relations for Waffle House. Certainly appreciate you coming in as well.
Thank you for having me.
And Nick Masino, President and CEO of the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for telling me not to read everything.
My pleasure.
John Pearson, one of my buddies, I should say. He has been in law enforcement in the community for more than 35 years. And we thought it was very important to have a law enforcement executive joining us. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Okay. One of the things that it was interesting was that I understood that Mr. Miller said that it was important that we continue the conversation because we don't just want the incidents to occur and nothing happen. But before we get there, I would like each of you to kind of give me an assessment of where your head is on this whole issue of racism, the current events that are happening now, just to kind of give me your perspective of where we are today. And I'd start with you.
Okay. Well, thank you again for hosting me on this conversation. I am Nicole Hendrickson, and I am the chairwoman-elect for Gwinnett County government. And we are the second largest, most diverse county in the state of Georgia. And I will have to say that racial relations, racial tension, anything around diversity and inclusion, I mean, this is my world right now. Making history as the first African-American woman to serve in the seat in the county's.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. In the county's 202-year history. It didn't sit well with everyone in the county. And considering that we also had other commissioners, African-American, that will now be joining the board, there is the fear of the change and the shift, not only politically, but also demographically. And so this is my world. And how do we bridge what once was into the future and make people feel that sense of stability and security to know that, with change in leadership, we're still going to be effective leaders because we want to do a good job for our community. We just have different ideas of how to go about doing that.
And what has been the reaction of you being the first? I've got to be curious about. That's got to be, in this political climate, just a very tough situation right now.
And it depends on who you talk to. So you have a great deal of the community who is very excited and energized, but there is a community sentiment that feels that just uneasy about that change. There's a lot of unknowns with new leadership that doesn't look like what it has looked like for 200 years. So what does that mean for our county and our future? And is it going to continue to mirror what we've always benefited for the past 200 years, or is that going to change? And so it's having the ability to communicate what a future looks like, but also involving people in envisioning the future together. So.
And we wish you well on that journey.
Thank you.
We know it's going to be tough too.
Thank you.
Mr. Masino, you're the chair of the Chamber of Commerce of one of the most diverse counties in the state. And what are you seeing from that perspective as well?
Sure. Thank you. And so I'm the president and CEO of the Gwinnett Chamber. And just for clarity purposes, because it's been a bragging point of mine for well over a decade, is we are the most diverse county in the Southeast United States, which makes us the most diverse county in Georgia. You have to get to DC, Montgomery County, counties around DC to find a county as diverse as us. So there's over 3,000 counties in the United States, and we're the 37th most diverse. My friends in Dekalb County will say all the time, no, we're more diverse. And people forget the definition of diversity, which is inclusion. It's people of different races. Dekalb County has more people of color, non-white people, but they're not as diverse as we are because we have a large population of Black, Hispanic, Asian, and white. And it's truly a melting pot. And unlike no other county in the Southeast United States, how do I feel? Personally, and then I'll answer professionally. So we're listening on YouTube. I know there's a video, but I'm the only white person on the panel. Just wanted to point that out. Yeah. I don't mean to freak you out, Jocelyn, but yes. So I will share with you, it's been a personal journey for me. I know I don't think we're just talking about what happened this summer, but we're talking about this lifetime and for all of our lifetimes. When I heard the term white privilege, I was immediately defensive because I'm white and I haven't done anything wrong. My family didn't do anything wrong. And I had to get past that. And when I recovered from that feeling defensive, I started thinking more retrospectively about it. How have I benefited? And I will tell you, for the people in the table, you can't have the same discussions I have from a white person to a white person. People get very defensive about it, and they're going to be more open to me than people that don't look like them. And it's just been interesting. I've had a lot of interesting discussions with family members and coworkers and friends, and it's just interesting about the whole spectrum. And I would say that I would respond with, hey, I got defensive at first too, and I denied that it existed. But let's think about it. And how have we benefited and how have other people not benefited? And why do they have to do more to get to the same place we are, or to get actually not even get us as far, but they've worked harder? And it's really tough discussions. Okay, that's just me, Nick Masino, personal experience. Now to answer it as I lead the greatest chamber in the United States, the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce, we are without a doubt been an inclusive chamber since I arrived 14 years ago. But I'm very, very proud of our staff and our board that really took this opportunity of what happened this summer to turn it really depends on your perspective. Was this a negative thing or was this an awakening and it's the greatest thing that's ever happened? It just depends on your perspective. But I took over a year ago and was given the opportunity to lead the organization, and we were not reflective of the beautiful diversity of Gwinnett County. And I had this plan of just using over in the next 2 to 3 years, we'd get more diverse. Well, I just seized the opportunity, and we went from a not as reflective as we should have been. We actually were less diverse than we were years ago, and we just got stagnant. And I just used this opportunity, and we are now arguably the most diverse chamber in the United States. I don't know that for a fact because nobody measures it. But when I look at where we were to where we've come, it's been dramatic. And Njeri Miller, who's sponsoring this with Dan, she was completely supportive. I did not have a board member that wasn't supportive of the changes. And so I'm very, very proud in every category you could measure: women, people of color, Black, Asian, Hispanic. 188% increase was the smallest. And you can have fun with percentages if you had very few people. And believe me, I've taken advantage of every percentage increase to brag about. But this is not a sprint; it's a marathon. So next year we'll do more. But I'm excited about the changes that are coming. Nicole has just been in this for 12 months or 18 months running her election. I'll just share my perspective. I've known Nicole for well over a decade, and I couldn't be more excited about her and the changes, because where she absolutely describes herself as the first Gen X Black female to be elected to this position. I just see Nicole Love Hendrickson, who loves her community, who cares, who has shown her love for Gwinnett and the people in Gwinnett. And as a former social worker, she cares about people, but she also cares about the business community. And so I'm excited a person that cares about Gwinnett just got elected. That's my view of Nicole.
I've got to ask you, though, on the personal note.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've talked with a number of my white friends who were very defensive about white privilege and the title, and till they understand, the nuances of it and the subtleties. What was your aha moment?
I don't know that it was a specific aha moment. I just did what some of my friends asked me to do, which is, why don't you do some research and why don't you Google white privilege and see what you see, and maybe watch some videos, and I have some movies to watch, and I'm doing my homework assignments. And I said, hey, I'm not going to read any books. If it's not Audible, I'm not reading it. But I've been doing research, and I've got a lot more to learn. But the whole thing's been a journey, and I've grown, and I've challenged some people that I thought that would maybe be open to being challenged, and some shut me down immediately, and we'll get there. I mean, if you start from a place of love and friendship, people are open. And I try to do that at work without crossing any lines, but it's been tough. But I do not have there wasn't a singular time. It's been a process for me this summer. And now, we're in winter now, but.
And great that you got there too.
Yeah, and I'm not there yet. It's a journey.
Yeah, it's always a journey for a lot of us. I mean,
Yes.
on both ends. John, I'm sorry, Mr. Pearson.
I'm John. Mr. Pearson was my father. I haven't arrived to the place where I deserve to be called Mr. Pearson.
Oh, yes, you have. I have to ask you, as a law enforcement executive, what has been happening, on both sides of the law enforcement spectrum has to be concerning and maybe misunderstood by a lot of people. The whole defund the police and, what's been happening with the incidents that have occurred with people of color.
I think the things that we've gone through as a country are just indicative of the reality that law enforcement has to change the way that it's done business. I look at what's happened, and I'd like to consider myself a student of law enforcement. So for a number of years, I've wondered why we've never changed the way that we police and the processes that we use in policing. I'll share a story with you that was really my aha moment. I was a deputy commissioner, a deputy director of police services for Dekalb County. We had a particular community that we were having tremendous challenge with crime in that community. So our crime analysis people, we looked at the numbers, and that about two square mile radius was where the majority of our crimes were occurring. And so it was my responsibility to create a response to that, and I did. I created a response that I called the Safe Dekalb. We utilized our uniform division, our criminal investigations, our special operations. We brought every resource that the police department had to bear on this particular community. And we absolutely had a phenomenal impact on the crime. I think if I remember correctly, we reduced crime in that community by the violent crime by 17% and property crime by 21%. And by all admissions that people would think that that was a success. But then I began to look at the impact that we had on that community, because the crimes that were committed in that community were committed against people who lived in that community. They had already been victimized by the criminal element of that area. And so I come in with a crime, initiative and strategy that does not include them. And then we re-victimize them by the way that we police in that community. And so as a law enforcement executive, at this stage in my career, I will never create a crime strategy that does not include the community that I intend to work in, because they have a right. They have a right to have input in that process. And so, I was raised in law enforcement from a perspective. It was always us against them. It was always the police against the community. We wanted to say it was the criminals, but at the end of the day, it was the community and the criminals that resided there. So now we're in a place where we're having to figure out how do we go back and build trust in those communities so that we create legitimacy. See, it's that community that we went in and victimized that gives us the legitimacy to police them, when and only when they realize and know and believe that the efforts that we are making are there to help and support them. They give us legitimacy to be there. Then they trust us so that we can go in and work with them to impact crime in particular communities and to make a difference. But as long as I am from the outside, and I go back to my original story where we went into that community, the people that lived there, they didn't have any place to go. They had to put up with the criminals, and they had to put up with the warring police department. But the majority of the police department, we went home to another community. We didn't have to live that. And so some people say it was a success. I claim it as my biggest failure as a law enforcement leader.
When you hear the term defund the police, what does that mean? What does that evoke with you?
It evokes a thought process that says what they really mean is to reallocate some of the funding from the police department. I just can't imagine anybody in any community thinking that they can defund and do away with the police department. And I understand that frustration, because we have become a community where police are called for, if you don't know how to handle it, you don't know what to do with the situation, you'll call the police. Well, the police should not be put in those kinds of situations, because we don't respond and handle everything. And so I think one of the biggest challenges, how do we deal with mental health? Okay. I am a police officer. I go to a training academy. I learn, criminal law, I know traffic law, and I understand that, but I don't have any training as it relates to being able to deal with people who are in a mental health crisis. And so I cannot and should not be expected to apply my same policing strategies to deal with someone who's in a mental health crisis. They have a completely different need. And so when I hear people, and I think people are realizing that, and so when I hear people talk about defunding the police, I hope what they're really trying to say is that we need to reallocate some of our funding so that the government can better serve the people in that community.
So you think it would be a good idea to have health professionals alongside the police working in cases? I mean, I have to admit, I just went through this. And you're right, the frustration of A, knowing someone has a mental health issue, and B, knowing that you don't want to have them arrested because that's not going to solve the problem, but C, not having anybody there who can really handle that situation.
You call a police officer into that situation. I am trained that when I get there, I have to have control of that situation. So I tell that person who's in a mental health crisis that they have to listen to me, that they have to calm down, and they have to think rationally. Well, if they could think rationally, we wouldn't be in that situation.
Exactly.
You know, and they're hearing voices talk to them, and I'm trying to tell them, well, no, you know, those aren't voices. You know, they're not strange people talk. But then they see me turn around and key my mic, and I'm talking to strange people who aren't there either. And so, how do they trust what I'm trying to tell them? I just don't have the training to be able to deal with that, and no police officer does. We need to make sure that we have some kind of partnership, mental health partnership. And that's just one example of where we can, and I believe should, reallocate some of the funding from the police department to other areas. We may need to increase some funding in some other areas. But we just have to do a better job at serving our people. And we can't expect police officers to be able to handle every situation that they're thrust into.
I think that's a great perspective, and a lot of people need to hear that too. Ms. Boss?
Yes. Well, personally, I'll say I was raised in Dekalb County. And when it came time for high school, I, like our Vice President-elect, Kamala Harris, got on the bus at my high school that was right behind my house, walked up there, got on the bus, and drove for an hour to go to a high school where I and fellow folks who were on the bus with me would be in the minority. Substantially, to be able to have access to resources that weren't at my home high school. That resonated with me in a very deep way, because once we were there in school, it was difficult because there were people there who didn't want us to be there. Mm-hmm. And those folks who told us, that was great because at least I knew where I stood. But the people who didn't want us to be there, who kept it to themselves but did it in other covert ways, it was difficult to know who you could trust and who you couldn't. And I just don't think any child, even though high school we're starting to become young adults, but that any child should have to worry about that when they're at school, on top of everything else they're trying to do. So that sat with me, and I let that marinate for a little bit. Went off to college, decided I didn't want to stay in Georgia. I wanted to go elsewhere, and went to the University of Iowa, where I had a terrific career, did a lot of things that I don't think I would have been able to do had I stayed in Georgia at the time. And I'm very grateful for that. I got my BA in journalism, was trying to decide between television and print. I actually did an internship at 11 Alive News. And so I was leaning towards broadcast until it finally came the day to make the decision. I went print. And the reason I did is because I felt like I needed more time to tell the story and to offer an opportunity for people who don't normally get approached to be able to have a voice. So I went into journalism, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and thinking I was going to change the world. And
as we all did.
Right. So then reality hit. And after the, 33rd middle of the night police car wreck call that I went out to, I said, there's got to be some other things I can do. And so I was able to get involved in the particular community where I was living in Florida at the time, to be able to do something with the city government there, two cities, and really try to emphasize the ways that they were trying to impact positively their community. These communities being ones that were highly African-American. The numbers were very high there. And there also was issues in crime. So these two cities were trying to be proactive. And so I had an opportunity to try and help them spread the word, get stories to be told, so that people elsewhere would know, hey, there's some struggles going on here. and we'd like to walk hand in hand with you to address them. So after doing journalism and print newspaper for a little while, I ended up in Savannah, and from there I was covering the courts. And I decided, sat to, I don't know, the 10th or 11th time at midnight waiting for the jury to come back. And having seen so many lawyers, many of them who were very good and several of them who were not, I said, I could do that. And I could probably do a better job, certainly, than the ones who were horrible. So I went to law school in California. And I ended up practicing law for about 12 years. And one of the things that I did do for 9 years was that I actually served as an attorney for parents or the children in child abuse and child neglect cases, juvenile delinquency cases, mental incapacity, developmentally disabled persons, folks in need of guardianship or conservatorships, do not resuscitate orders, and then some minor criminal defense work.
That was your journalism.
All of that.
That was your
all
community.
of that.
Yeah.
I tell you,
That
all
was
of
your
that.
mission.
So then I did that for 9 years. And as you can imagine, I saw people at their worst, trying to help them to become better and get to a point where they either could reunite their families, navigate the legal system in such a way that they may have an opportunity once they return to the community to be productive citizens and not have those barriers that criminality often causes people to suffer. So after 9 years, I was a little burnt out, and I came back home to Georgia, brought my son. My husband had to stay in, we were in Michigan at the time. He had to finish up his work, and came back to Georgia. And I tell you what, Georgia had changed a lot in the 20-some odd years I had been gone. And it was really interesting because I found that with all of the credentials that I had and all of the experience that I had, that I couldn't get an interview. Because I guess I'd been gone so long and all of my references were in other states. And, you know, if you don't know somebody who knows somebody, it's kind of hard to get into those circles.
The good old boy system.
I tell you, it was real difficult. But I will say that there was one company that was willing to take a chance on me, and that was Waffle House. And I went to Waffle House, I kid you not, I applied to be a server. I just needed some hours and some benefits. And they saw my application that same day and called me and said, "Do you know about our management program?" And I said, "What management program?" And they explained it to me. I changed my application to management. And ultimately, I became a unit manager, meaning I ran a restaurant in the Conyers area, Conyers, Georgia. And then I became a district manager where I was responsible for 3 stores and 3 unit managers and trying to help them become successful as well and coach their teams to success before I came over to the corporate side. And so what I've seen in all of those experiences, I've seen various opportunities for change, some that were taken, many that were not. I've also lived personally, my family is diverse. My husband is white, and our son is, well, he's checked other, he's checked black, he's checked, I mean, the census forms are really, really interesting to deal with. But not only that, he is a veteran of the U.S. Army, and he is a former law enforcement officer. He actually retired from the federal level in law enforcement.
This is your son.
This is my husband.
I was going to say,
My
this
son.
is your son? I was going to go, no, this couldn't be your son.
No. My son just turned 18.
I was
so
like, okay, good.
He's just starting his journey. So into that dynamic that I had grown up in, and now I'm back in Georgia, and there are different dynamics than there were when I was growing up. And I have now been with my husband 24 years. We knew from the beginning that there were going to be some difficulties. I mean, you can't go into a biracial or multiracial relationship without considering those consequences. And we were going to be okay with them. We were fine with them. And little did we know that there would be things that would force us to have conversations with our son sooner than we wanted to, at a very young age, 4, the age of 4, to have to explain to him what the N-word meant as it was shouted to us as we were walking down the street, just he and I. And then recognizing now through this very, very divisive and just really heartbreaking election cycle that we've gone through, seeing all of the divisiveness in the country, and people can't even agree to disagree. If you don't agree with me, we can't have anything to do with each other. All of that then fell into on top of our relationship. And remember, he's law enforcement. So our conversations can be quite interesting.
I bet.
Can be quite interesting, but we're able to be very respectful to one another where we disagree. We agree on a lot of things. But on those points where we do disagree, simply a lot of it has to do with, I don't have his experience. My experience clearly was different. But I'm hopeful that our example, our relationship can be more indicative of what I thought I was growing up into as an adult in the United States, where we can have the conversations, as difficult as they can be. Sometimes you have to walk away, collect yourself, and come back. But be able to have the conversation, and if you can't agree, to be able to say, we're just going to agree to disagree. And that's what I'm most hurt by right now, that doesn't seem to be happening.
And I've got to ask you on a personal note, and I say that I have a very good friend who's a biker. I'm a biker. And
Biker mama.
And I have a very good friend who's white. And he and I, the last time we went to North Georgia, we were a little nervous about that whole appearance of us being, even though we're just friends, of being together. I'm wondering how you feel with the climate and the rise in white supremacy and all of the things that are happening in terms of the public persona of racism, how that has affected you personally as a couple.
Well, again, there have been some very difficult conversations that we've had to have. And we just had to have the ground rules that in our house, this would be the place where you could come for respite, that you can get away from all of that. We try to limit how much news is listened to in the house, and also how many of those conversations that we start with, I bet you won't believe, ... It has been tough because when we were in Michigan, where we lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for the 9 years where I was practicing that family law and criminal law, I was, and my son was one of a handful, if that many, in the town where we lived. And it would be interesting because my husband, as a federal law enforcement officer, would drive around and meet people and talk with people and end up in circumstances where folks would say things. And then we would ultimately show up at an event, and those folks really clearly did not know that my husband was married to a Black woman. And so there were those kinds of conversations. And then ultimately when we left was really the last straw was when my son was in the 4th grade. He was in a private school at the time. And he again was called the N-word, this time by another student. And it was my husband's decision that, hey, this is it. I do not want you all subjected to this. I want you to move back south. He knew I wanted to be close to my family, and all my family is here in Georgia, South Carolina. And so we did that. And even being apart for 2 years so that he could finish what he needed to do at his work and employment and retire, while I was down here getting our son settled into school and settled into things that he just was not familiar with. Because when he went to school in the Upper Peninsula, he was the only Black student in the classroom until there was a group of 3 who moved in from Gary, Indiana. Don't know how they ended up in the Upper Peninsula. Don't ask me. I don't know. I asked their mother several times, how did you pick? But so when they arrived, my son, Nathan, was very excited because he had somebody who at least reminded him of himself. And they were able to have conversations that he couldn't necessarily have with some of his other classmates. So it was really life-altering in many ways. The fact that I was someone's mother who then had the same responsibility that my parents had to try to guide them and explain race relations. My family taught us, you love everybody. You may not like everybody, but you love everybody because that's what God calls you to do. And taking that and seeing that sometimes that's really hard to do. Thank goodness for the Holy Spirit, because sometimes I tell you. But that has really colored my experience. And I'm so grateful to Waffle House for having given me this opportunity, because one of the things that I found out that I did not know about Waffle House is that it has always had a very strong culture of inclusion. From the day when the first store was opened in unincorporated Dekalb County, just outside of the city of Avondale, when we opened that store and then a second store, at the second store, there was a woman who everyone called Miss Lucy. She was African American. And there was not an issue. Now, this is in the 50s, because we were opened in 1955. And even from the first day, everyone who wanted to eat could come through the front door. You know, that's a big deal, coming through the front door.
Oh, yeah.
Sit down at the counter and eat. There was no come to the back door, none of that. And when the second store was open and Miss Lucy happened to be in that store because they purchased another restaurant and made it a Waffle House, she stayed on and had, I believe, a career of 47 years with us. And learning those things and looking at the layout of what our founders and then ultimately now our chairman, Joe Rogers Jr., has done, and now our CEO, Walt Amer, has done to continue the development of that culture. The thing about Waffle House is careers in management. We're going to just talk about management right now.
Right.
The thing about management, and particularly at Waffle House, is it takes time to develop the skills that you need to be able to lead a team of 30 or more people, and then ultimately 30 at 3 places, and then 9 places, and then so on, until you become an executive vice president responsible for 300 or more stores yourself, leading that underlying team behind you of trying to get them to do and believe in the same mission. And today, people are all about instant gratification. Got to have it now. Hold it out for management, you know, that kind of thing. And they don't realize that because it takes time, that you're not going to necessarily see that diversity that they want to see at every level. But it's there because we're looking 20 years forward. The people who are going into management now, the folks who are coming out of the hourly position, becoming assistant managers and third shift supervisors, then deciding they want to go into management, they're going to be the future executive vice presidents. So we usually, you know, people look at our executive vice presidents and we take a ding on that because we have one African American male. But do you know that each of the other men in those positions have been mentors to the other men, be they white, black, whatever, and the women who've been coming along to take their place. And so it's a very different culture than any other place, any other restaurant. And I didn't know about it until I became a part of it. And it's really hard sometimes because a lot of times folks hear about, you know, the bad stuff that happens late at night that we didn't have any control over. You know, folks come in, they've had a little too much fun, and they decide they want to continue the fun. But there's so much good that happens, so many inspiring stories that happen. The way that our associates, that's what we call our employees, the hourly and management, we're all associates, the way that they touch the lives of the people who come into the Waffle House. And you can be rich, you can be poor, you can be anywhere in between, you can be white, you can be black, you can be a vegan, John Ossoff. You know, you come on down to the Waffle House. We've got great hash brown bowls. So, I mean, it's just been those things, all of those experiences that I had growing up, and now as an adult in what I hope to be my final career choice, has led me to firmly believe that businesses, and particularly like Waffle House, have a responsibility to the communities that they serve. And Waffle House has embraced that. May not always be visible to the people who want to detract from what we're doing, but it is there. And if you really want to know about it, all you have to do is ask.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to mention now that we have done the round robin, that I don't want this to be another round robin. I want this to be a conversation. Everybody's mics are hot or open. And so I want you to feel free to join in that conversation because that's what we want to have. This has been eye-opening and certainly appreciate everyone sharing their experiences. Interestingly enough, I was trying to figure out all the different questions without getting into the weeds about some of the issues. But what I found was there has been a new Pew study, and I just throw this out to anybody, but there's been a Pew study that had said with all of the incidents that have happened with the police, with the white supremacists, the marches, everybody talking about what needs to be done, that most Americans don't believe anything is really going to happen. And, now that all the shouting is over, they're very skeptical about what happens next. What do you say? John, I see your mouth quivering.
Well, and I just have a somewhat of a different approach to this. When I look at trying to understand the why, how do we get here, and I'm just going to focus on the black-white relationship for just a moment, if you'll allow me. We live in a country who says that we have certain inalienable rights, that we're all created equal, and that that the Creator gave us certain powers, and so there is a process of things that we should be able to enjoy. But when I look at from a sociological standpoint, I see that in order for us to get to those places, there are basically 5 institutions that teach us how to be Americans, how to be citizens, and those basic institutions are it's the family, it's the family, the church, the education, it's economics, and it's government. Well, when I look at how African slaves were brought over to this country, all those institutions were not available to them. Families were separated, so they didn't have the opportunity to learn how to be a family. Religion was primarily used to keep them in place, and so that they would stay in their place. And then education, they weren't allowed. The African slaves, they weren't allowed to be educated. They didn't have the opportunity to participate in the economic process. So and government. The government was always used to keep them in place and keep them enslaved. And so all of the processes that we have that will help someone to develop into all the things that this country calls great and everyone should be afforded, those African slaves weren't afforded those things. All of those institutions had a racist foundation in them, and that hasn't changed much. So when we talk about institutional racism, it's still very prevalent. It's the complexion of it may have changed. Our approach of it, has changed, and it has changed, but it's still very much institutional racism. And so when I look at from a law enforcement perspective the things that are going on, and I see that the national president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives asked the question to the Attorney General, about institutional racism in law enforcement, and he doesn't believe that it's there. And when we ask those same questions about education, Ms. Boss described how she had she experienced the educational that it was full of institutional racism, because in order for her to get the same level of education, she couldn't go to her local school. She had to go to and so I think until, when you ask, will ever change? And people are suspect as to will anything change? I think until we begin to have a willingness to tear up the fertile ground of institutional racism, we may not see any change. And be clear now, when I say institutional racism, I'm not talking about individual racism. I'm talking about the racism that's inherent in the process of living day to day that we have to face, and nobody wants to talk about that. Dan shared with us, when he talks about white privilege to his friends. When Dan, a white man, talks about white privilege to his friend, they look at him like he's a little crazy and they don't want to accept it. So do you think that when a black man comes to those same friends and want to talk about institutional racism, or white privilege, that they're willing to listen to me and accept it and validate it at any point? That has not been my experience. So when you ask me, do I think that will anything really change, until we as Americans are willing to be truthful and honestly look at it and carefully evaluate it based on the facts, I don't hold a lot of optimism that there'll be change unless there are people like us who are willing to sit down and have those conversations, to be honest with one another and respect one another.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And honestly, I would say that actually I'm very optimistic about our future. And when I look at where we were and where we are now and where we're going, it does give me a lot of hope, because I don't think 200 years ago I would have been sitting here. You wouldn't have been sitting in your position. If Waffle House did not decide to take a chance on you, you would not be sitting in your position. And so I think there is hope in that. And I think we will see change. I think change also begins with us, and it's internalized, and we should internalize it and what we can do to be part of that change. When we talk about institutions and policies and structures that have been put in place that have historically excluded people, well, in order to change policies and those structures, you have to change policymakers. And me going into the position that I'm getting ready to go into really was about representation. It was about representing people who have historically been excluded and giving a voice to those who have historically been ignored from policies, and also giving a voice and amplifying the voice of the needs of all of our citizens and constituents. And so I think when you look, at a granular level, I think it's a very grassroots and granular level that you'll start to see the change happen. It's very incremental. I love what you said about building that culture of influence and it starting from within. And we may not see the change right away. It may not be immediate, but it may be 10, 20 years from now where we'll start to see some of those structural barriers torn down and taken away. But it's up to us to start or to continue those dialogues, because we all stand on the shoulders of many people who have fought and died.
Yes.
So that we could be where we are today, having these conversations and sitting next to Nick Masino, having these conversations and these dialogues and being in these leadership positions. And I won't ever forget that. And I will never forget how far we've come to get to where we are. And I think we need to continue that dialogue. It's about carrying the mantle forward and thinking about where we need to go for our future generation. I have a 6-year-old son. He's about to be 7. And, he heard the N-word for the first time as well. And it's a conversation that parents don't want to have. And I actually remember having this conversation with Nick, and I don't know if this could be your aha moment, Nick, but we talked about the conversations that we can't have. Our conversations we have with our children are very different. Conversation you have with your son and daughter is very different than the conversation I would have with my son. And it's also preparing him and training him to be that next generation to carry that mantle forward as well. And my husband and I, when it comes to his education and when it comes to the things that we want to see, we're advocates in that process, because we can see how the institutions can further impede his progress if we're not very intentional about being advocates for that. And it's not only looking at this as being an advocate for my son, but being an advocate for everybody who has historically not had a voice. And some people, think of that as, we want a voice, we just need the amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
And communities need those amplifiers. And
I think of Njeri
Yeah.
talking about the fact that people want instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you, with chairman-elect, going in and knowing that people want instant gratification, and that doesn't always happen that quickly, what is the challenge that you feel that you're facing, your biggest challenge, and what's the biggest thing you want to do in your position?
Oh my goodness. And I get this question a lot. And
Darn,
the
I thought
biggest
I was
challenge.
asking
You thought you got me. Well,
Nicole, you got that for 6 months during every campaign.
I know,
every campaign question.
And you did a great job
just
answering.
Been built into my campaign rhetoric. But, outside of the campaign rhetoric, what I will say, the biggest challenge right now is creating that level of stability and setting the tone for at least the next 6 months to a year in a community that has experienced a shift in leadership all across the board, from our county commission to our sheriff, to our tax commission, to our school board, to changes in leadership all across the board. There is a level of fear and instability. We've already been told we're going to turn into Dekalb County. We've already been told we're going to turn into Clayton County. And if you can understand the racial undertones of dog whistle, then you know that is something that we have to overcome. As new leaders coming into this, we have to work very harder to set that tone. And this is part of privilege as well, because African Americans coming into leadership are under greater microscopes and have to prove themselves and have to work 10 times harder, because one mess up is worse than a white male screwing up big time. So we have to, my challenge and my biggest obstacle in overcoming is, how do we set that tone for the next 6 months to unify our community, to build that bridge from what was to what is now, to build that sense of understanding of where we are. We're not the same county we were 202 years ago, but it's going to take everyone in the community to drive a vision of where we want to be and who we want to be. And how do we do that in a county as big as ours, as diverse as ours, who's very politically divided? That is the biggest challenge. And that is what I hope to accomplish, is really focusing on building that beloved community that Dr. King has always imagined. And how do we reimagine that here in Gwinnett County? And so that's my biggest challenge, but that's one of my top priorities.
And I saw you taking furious notes, Nick. Weigh in.
Sure. Well, I think Nicole is the right person at the right time, without a doubt. And her popularity was with men, women, Gen Zs to baby boomers. It's really impressive. White, Black, Hispanic, Asian. I mean, she really is the person that is set to bring Gwinnett back or together. Really, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I did want to just reference to, she said maybe my aha moment. And I had this conversation with Nicole. Her son's young. My son is 18. And I have a coworker who has a Black female coworker. She has 2 adult sons. And I have another one that has 2. Also, I have 2 that have 2 adult sons. And when we were just going through all this together as a work family and realizing that I never once was worried about my white 18-year-old son going out, having an interaction with the police department, and no offense to the police, it's just, I mean, you get this more than I get it, that I was never once worried he would not come home, because an interaction with the police department would be, he got a speeding ticket, maybe they pulled him, he was changing his tire and they would help him. I never thought of it. And when that reaction happened to me, that these ladies who I respect and care for, that they've had to worry about something that I'd never even acknowledged, that was, to me, that was one of the things that was like, okay, I get white privilege. And in the same vein, Nicole, I'm not sure if I shared this with you or not, but we were going down to Charleston for a vacation this summer, and my son wanted to drive his new Jeep and bring his best friend, who happens to, they're football players. He's a big, good looking, tall, black guy. My son's a big, good looking, white guy. And I was like, guys, okay, yes, we're going to go through South Carolina, and we live in the bubble of Gwinnett, which is, again, I think a little. I mean, I know there's problems. You just got off the campaign trail. But for me, it's just this utopia of inclusion and equity. I know we're not there yet, but it's a progress. But I'm selling Gwinnett every day of my life, so it's perfect. So I said, hey guys, I said I'd always train my son. When you get pulled over, you roll the windows down, you put your hands on, it's in the evening, you turn the lights on, get your hands and keep them, don't move them until they tell you. And I'm like, listen, you guys are going to South Carolina together, and you want to take the top off. And I said, just be extra careful and don't do anything you don't move until they tell you to move. My son is he's a challenger. He wants to challenge authority all the time. And I'm like, this is not the state to challenge authority. You guys just go from A to B. Of course, they're two 18-year-old boys who are headed off to college. His friend's going to Wofford, and he's like, they decided just to stop by the college, and they show up 2 hours later. I'm scared to death they won't answer the phone because they're two dumb boys, but young men. But anyway, that was part of my process. And I had a lot of those. I just didn't know that there was any specific one. You said the Pew study said that most Americans don't think there's going to be change. And I have felt differently about that as we went from summer to fall. And I've always been a big fan of the term, and believe me, some you all might know who said it, but it's act locally, and then hopefully changes happen globally. I know I just butchered that, but the reality is, and I feel like the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce, we can do what we can do. I sometimes don't have, by the way, we didn't read the bio, thank God, but I was an 8-year mayor of a small town in Georgia. And, this is nothing in comparison to what Nicole's done, but I was a Yankee Catholic Italian, and they elected me mayor of their small southern town, which still makes me laugh today that they did that. But I was just thinking maybe no one else wanted to do it, because I did run unopposed, unlike Nicole, I had to fight for it. But the reality is they were open to change, and I have been elected, so I get to speak from a recovering elected official. I don't always have faith in government's going to fix it, but then you think about what government has done well and what hasn't done well. I mean, the GI Bill for white Americans was incredible. I mean, what we educated America and created the best economic times America had ever seen in the 50s and 60s.
It was actually helpful for Black Americans. My father wouldn't have gone to college had it not been the GI Bill.
Well, I did some research that said otherwise, so I'm great. I'm glad to hear that there was that experience. But the thing I was going to say is, when you talk about the GI Bill and education, if we can get everybody, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all on the educational track by their reading by third grade, all the studies show that everybody academically can get to equality, or actually have fair equity in education, not just equality. And we have got to just pour every resource we can. And that's where I think the government can do something. But then I would say I'm not a big fan of leaning on government. And I know that's not the silver bullet. That's just an example. As you used an example earlier, you could sit here all day and we could talk about every single opportunity. But I do believe it really means something to all of us. We have to all do something. And number one, have awkward conversations with people that look like you, people that don't look like you. I would suggest for my white friends, practice on other white people, and just out of respect, and try to get the terms down, because it's just been enlightening for me. And then sitting down with people I trust that are my friends, people of color, and I always say, hey, listen, I'm going to screw up, and please give me grace, because I may say the wrong things. And I know that one of the things that was said to me, you had mentioned white supremacy is on the rise. 3 months ago, I've been like, what are you talking about? Because again, I'm not a white supremacist. I don't know any. I don't hang out with them. And people of color are like, they don't wear hoods and sheets today. I mean, they're
much more sophisticated now.
Yeah, they got AK-47s.
Yeah, well, and they're and we have cell phones now.
Yes.
Getting recorded.
Social media.
Yeah, people have to be smarter about their white supremacy, and so I went from saying, oh, I don't think that that's true, to saying, well, maybe I don't know, to, okay, maybe it's obviously happening. And what can I do to help stop it? And I don't have an answer as chamber president, but I'm open to listening to both my board, my members, my constituents, and helping create an opportunity for us to get better.
I would say this to you: when your African American friends tell you that white supremacy is on the rise, I would suggest that you place a greater value on that statement than maybe you have in the past, because, see, I'm going to notice that, because I've lived, I've experienced, I know racism. I'm going to have a better insight than you are, because, and again, this is not a shot at you, Dan, but you've lived white privilege. I've lived the other side of that. And so I think there has to be that willingness. If we're going to move forward, if we're going to be more impactful, white America has to be willing to listen to the perspective that Black people bring to the table about the issue. And you can't just deny it because you don't think that it's the reality.
You can't dismiss our experiences.
Right. We're living this every day, and we talk about being stopped by law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement for 35 years, over 35 years. I teach executive level at law enforcement. I teach in various academies around the state. But when I get pulled over, I'm just a Black man driving, and I have to deal with the same things. I put my hands on the wheel, and I don't move them till I'm told. And I usually am armed, and I'll tell them quick. I've got a pistol on my side, or it's in the truck. It's because I want to survive that. And I have to teach my sons and my friends and all their children how to survive a trap. There is something wrong with a criminal justice process where people have to feel that they have to teach their children how to survive an encounter with police officers. And see, and you can't relate to that. But nevertheless, it's my experience. It's real. It's our experience.
But one of the things I think that's really interesting about all of that, and very important, is that a house divided on itself cannot stand.
Right.
When Dr. King and all of those great civil rights icons led the movement, they recognized that they couldn't do it by themselves.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I was really heartened by this summer was seeing the number of people from other communities, whether they were white, whether they were Native American, and we forget about the Native Americans a lot of times, Native American, what have you, joining African Americans to say, this isn't right. We can do better. That folks deserve the right to, if they've committed a crime, they deserve the right to arrive alive at the jail, and then they deserve the right to stand trial. That's our process. That's right. And so that really gave me hope. And that also brings me back to one of the things I think it's very important for businesses and communities to recognize the communities that they serve. And at Waffle House, that has been part of the blueprint. We believe in servant leadership. We're homegrown, so you can't just cut the line coming from some other company and, I want to be the executive vice president because I was over here. No, you got to do the same thing I did and be a trainee and then become a unit manager and on and on. But that each one of our restaurants, the way we look at them, people look at it as a big chain. We believe that these are a bunch of individual restaurants that are refugees that happen to live under an umbrella called Waffle House. Because every restaurant reflects the attitude of the staff there, the managers who are running those stores. And what is very important is the outreach that they're willing to do in their community. And we have worked really hard, and we're starting another initiative again, because as you know, things can become stagnant and there's always room for improvement. But the idea being an active participant in the development and the support of a community. And when I see people, make jokes about Waffle House and all the little things, I'm sure you can imagine, I think back to the folks who have committed crimes, have paid their debt to society, and can't get a job. But they can get a job at Waffle House, depending on what the crime was, of course. They can get a job at Waffle House. People who may not have embraced education because they didn't have the support at home to push them through, like you were talking about with your son. And I know that I had to do with my son, to push back against some of the assumptions that had been made. And these folks didn't have that. But they can go and find a career, a lifelong career at Waffle House, and put their children through college that they never went to, and maybe put a roof over their kids' heads that they never had, or be able to buy a piece of vehicle for their child graduating from high school that they didn't get until they were an adult. So the job aspect cannot be overlooked. And that is why right now, with COVID and everything that's going on, recognizing the impact that the virus has had on lives, people have lost their lives, a humongous number of people have lost their lives. But at the same time, those businesses that have been providing jobs, which are lifelines for people in these communities, they've lost their jobs. Where we've made decisions to shut things down completely, that becomes very difficult, because a lot of decisions don't have their paychecks cut. Okay.
Right.
At Waffle House, we all took pay cuts. The management, upper management, senior management took the most pay cuts, 40 to 60%, so that our lower level managers and our hourly folks could survive, so that we could move some money around, because we only can pay people when we bring money in, right?
We just hope that the Congress could be like Waffle House.
I've heard that before.
And that's Waffle House is a great example, but playing devil's advocate, it's not corporate America. And so, and not only that, but when you look at government, it's not government. And what I hear a lot of people saying is, we've got all these issues. Education is an issue. Healthcare is an issue. Jobs are an issue. And then I hear other people saying, well, where are we going to get the money to fix this? We can't keep throwing money. We've got a huge debt right now, and the debt is humongous. And if we keep adding to this debt, our grandchildren and our generations to come are going to be saddled with that. So how do you fix that? How do you convince people that there needs to be money put behind this to solve some of these ills, because it's not going to be done by the will of the people?
I defer to the corporate person in the room.
Well, it's interesting. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Communication, so I'm probably I am usually the dumbest person in the room, so I might be, but I can talk. I will say I listened to a lot of economists, and after the 2008 Great Recession, we expected inflation, because what did we do is we bailed out corporate America. Has anyone seen the inflation? Has anyone refinanced their house in the last 10 years?
I have.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we all have.
Yeah.
We either bought one or we
refinanced.
Yeah. Well, we all. Well, right now it's the lowest. You cannot basically go any lower.
Exactly.
It is prime. My point is, we can reinvest. And I think that what we have proven in the last decade is that the inflation that we have, if we didn't have inflation 10 years ago, we're probably okay. You can't just keep spending. The money has to come from somewhere, but we have to invest. And I think that, Nicole, maybe you said it earlier, but these incremental changes that are going to happen, I mean, you have to start somewhere. Even at Waffle House, what you hire today is the future leader. We have got to get it right with reading by third grade. And I'm the dumbest person in the room, but every smart person I talk to, if you can't get that right for everybody, then we're in trouble. But if I just think about, and I'm so glad that the GI Bill didn't just help white people, but think about what the GI Bill did for America. And what can you imagine if you had everybody producing at the same economic level, fairly and equitably, and what we can do. I mean, I Nicole, agree with you when you said our days are ahead, and we've got some. You're opportunistic about the future. I know I am. I wouldn't want to be doing what I'm doing if I wasn't excited about the future. But if we can get that right, I'm really excited. But we do have to invest, and maybe we were investing the wrong way. And there's times where I was not happy about the U.S. educational system, but you know what? It's our educational system. And so we just have to keep tweaking. It is incredible. Sure, there's some other countries benefiting from us that are better than us, but they also don't have the opportunities and challenges that we have. This is a great country. We're never satisfied. I've spent a lot of time around the world. I've had dinner in China. I've been to China 18 different times. I've been to Korea 12 different times. I've been all over Europe. Every single person I've ever met, I don't care what their political persuasion is, all they care about is the next generation. It's every dinner discussion I've ever had. It always ends with, hey, can you get my kid an internship in the United States? It's because we care about all of our kids that we talked about and their safety and their next step. That's what everybody cares about. And if we could just focus on getting it is a magical recipe. If everyone's reading on par by third grade, it is incredible what can happen.
And what you're saying is a no-brainer. But if you look in Georgia and you look at what happens with education and how resources are not allocated to education in Georgia, it's like, how do you convince people that you do need to invest? Because clearly in Georgia, we don't. We don't invest in public education. We would invest more in the criminal justice system than we invest in education. And so how do we get over that?
Which doesn't make any sense. That's insane what we focus on. I don't have a silver bullet. I'm just blessed that I'm in Gwinnett County, which is the greatest public school system in the United States.
Well, one of the things I would point back to is things that you said, John, about the institutional difficulties of the institutional racism, that they're difficult for a lot of people to see. But when you recognize that you bought a home in a community that over time, there wasn't much investment by the government, whether it was local government, state government, federal government, and those neighborhoods decline. Okay. You go to try and get a loan to do something about your particular property, only to be told that you can't get that loan. And we know from historical fact that banks had a redlining process that they used to be able to deny loans to people of color. That may not be as obvious today. It may not be so forefront today, but the vestiges of that remain. When you decide to build a highway or superhighway that shuts off or encloses one community, making it difficult for them to have access to food and money, loans, and quality education. And we forget about those areas because they're over there. And we've got the new shiny thing over here. All of that comes from history. There were decisions made then that are echoing very loudly down the corridors today and are still going to be shouting into the future. And so there are many things, I think, that we can do. What Nick, one of the things you talk about with education, but we also have, it's a multi-pronged attack that has to be made. I mean, I am heartbroken every time I drive on Memorial Drive. I remember as a high school student, we couldn't wait to get to Memorial Drive. There were so many great eateries and stores. They weren't all discount shops and title pawn shops and, third-hand car dealerships like they are today. There hasn't been that investment, but there have been in other areas. It's a priority issue. We have to decide what's important to us collectively. And I think there's a belief out there, and I've talked to people about it, that, well, they don't want the same things, because as soon as whoever they are, move into the neighborhood. Well, the neighborhood's no longer good enough. We got to move to a different neighborhood that's going to have better schools and this, that, and the other. I mean, I heard people telling me about, they talk about Conyers, and not to knock DeKalb County, my home county where I grew up. Y'all know y'all going to be y'all are becoming the next DeKalb County. What is that supposed to mean?
What does that mean? Yeah.
Right. So I think it is incumbent upon us. You said not by the will of the people, but you can't just look at government. I think pressure still needs to be applied to the government. We've got to get the right people elected. Mm-hmm. We've got to recognize that our futures are intertwined and they will not blossom and go forward for all of us if we don't come together on that. But I also think that in the communities, things that businesses can do in coming together to support the communities where there are, not just with jobs. But one of the things I know I had wanted to do before COVID made it difficult to go out and meet with folks and talk about these ideas and get them rolling, was really creating partnerships with the organizations in the communities that are the movers and shakers of those communities. For example, if there is high crime in a particular area and you've got businesses there, over time, businesses will leave as the crime rate increases if nothing's done about it. Well, what kind of partnerships, before you make the decision to leave, what kind of partnerships can be formed with those folks in the community who want to see you stay? Mm-hmm. What kind of answers can we come up with together that will maybe not solve the crime problem, but begin to have dialogue with law enforcement and with the city officials and with the local organizations to create a plan that makes it more hospitable for businesses to remain in the areas where they're serving the community. Mm-hmm. So I just think, there's, like you said, there's no one silver bullet. The problem is so big that you can be paralyzed by it. But we have to bite the elephant one bite at a time. And we have to keep doing it and keep coming back to it and get people to see that their future depends on everyone else's future. Because these kids we don't want to educate are the future nurses and doctors, and they're going to be taking care of us.
Our problem.
You either, like my grandmama used to say, you either pay now or you're going to pay later.
That's right.
So we have to decide where we want to put our resources.
And I was just slipped a note. I can't believe that we're almost out of time.
Oh my goodness.
I know we've had such a great conversation, but I want to do a round robin with some final thoughts. John?
At the end of the day, I think that there has to become a commitment to caring.
Exactly.
I've got to be willing to care as much about your family and your community as I am mine. And I think that may be the silver bullet, because if I am willing to demonstrate a genuine caring about your family, about your church, about your school system, about the economics in your community, and how the government serves you. If I'm willing to care for and fight for yours as much as I am mine, then we'll make the difference one step at a time. And Nicole, my last thing, I just want to say that I am you. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to get out there and put yourself out to take this tremendous challenge. And I absolutely know that there are not any easy days for you, but be encouraged and don't give up.
Thank you for that.
I am in total awe because I have been a reporter for over 40 some years. And I've covered the Gwinnett County Commission.
Yes.
So to see you and to realize how far we have come is quite an accomplishment.
Absolutely. And we have a community. I realize that I'm not in a silo leading this county to the promised land, for lack of a better word. But I see a vision for our future. And I know that I cannot do this alone, that I have to involve the community. Going back to what Mr. Pearson said, is that we have to involve our community in every decision that we make, because it's our community. It's not, I live in this community too. And what people fail to realize is that yes, I am an incoming elected official, but I'm also your neighbor. I'm also impacted by the policies and decisions and the tax increases that have come my way. I'm a homeowner. I have a child who's educated by our amazing school system. And so it matters to me just as much as it matters to everyone else. And that's what I want people to take away, is that I am your neighbor. So we're in this together. Yeah.
Thanks. Obviously, thanks to Njeri and Dan Miller with Wealth Horizon for sponsoring this and bringing us together and for their invitation. I would just say in closing that this is not an easy conversation. You all have lived an experience that I haven't lived. And I mean, everyone at the table and anyone listening that is not white. And so be patient with the folks that want to learn, and people have been patient with me, and it's been an incredible journey this summer. You all have lived this your whole lives, and I thanks for getting me up to speed. I truly appreciate the people that 10 years ago were, when I was asking the question as we were becoming the most diverse county in the U.S., okay, what's good about diversity? And I had those discussions 12 years ago where it made us, we were a better community because we could recruit people, companies from around the world, because we were more diverse and we had unique languages and we represented everybody. And people are like, oh, white people would be like, oh, okay, so diversity is not bad. I'm like, no, I think it's good. And so you could just like, allow yourself to be open and ask kind of maybe really obvious questions, but you can't come up with the answers yourself. And so you can explore these things. And so this is way more complex than just, is diversity good for your community? And these are tough things. And I appreciate being invited to have the discussion today.
Absolutely.
Well, I think he mentioned diversity. I think people need to really understand the difference between diversity and inclusivity.
Yes.
Diversity is being invited to the dance.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion is when you're asked to dance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to get past fighting over, diversity, quotas, whatever you want to call them. People who are invested and are committed need to be brought to the table and then ask their opinion.
Yeah.
And then allowed to help be a part of making what's new and great and good and coming in for the future, be a part of that.
Yes.
And we're never going to get there if we're unwilling to care, like John said, and recognize that the same things I want for my children, the generation is always, we want them to do better than we did, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same things that I want for my child, I know you want for your child, or you wouldn't be at this school. But it should be that way for every child, every school.
Mm-hmm.
And we just got to come together on that and realize that we all want the same things in terms of being able to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Oh, she took my line. No, seriously, thank you. And Nick, I do want to say to you, learning is just not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. So we have to have a dialogue. It's not just a one-way conversation. We have to learn how you were raised, because you have characteristics and cultures that we may not understand. So I want to just say to everybody, that is a two-way, three-way conversation where all of us can learn from each other. And it's not just us preaching. Because I have learned a lot in the conversations that I have had. And I want to say, whether you've listened to us today on Business Radio X or watched us on YouTube, we want to thank you for joining us for the Let's Continue the Conversation, a panel discussion on race and equality. We recognize that this is an evolving and dynamic subject. We hope we have opened your eyes to some of the complexities. So our plan is to revisit these topics and continue the conversation on a regular basis, hearing from other distinguished members of the Atlanta community. And I certainly want to thank Business Radio X for hosting this and to having such a great, enlightened conversation. And I am so privileged to be a part of it. And I thank them for inviting me. So until next time, I'm Jocelyn Dorsey. But remember, the phrase, and I looked this up because I wanted to have something profound to say because it's one of my favorite sayings, is you must be the change you want to see in the world. That's often credited to Mahatma Gandhi. But guess what? He didn't say that, not specifically in those words. What he did say in 1913, he published a piece that included the theme in this passage. And he said, "We but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude change around the world towards him." This is a divine mystery and a supreme, wonderful thing that it is, and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do. And thank you all for not waiting to see what others do. With that, I say good evening. I should say good afternoon, but I don't want to date this conversation. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.